Hello, everyone. Today we will discuss Chapter 13, Take a Tip to Avoid Pitfalls, from the book IFS for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. We can also discuss anything else from the book. Put your hands up to start the discussion. And let's take a moment to review our material. Yes, Anne?
One of my main questions was when the client's saying it's the self or the self-like part, well, it actually is the self-like part, and then it doesn't sound like self energy, but then the client's like, no, I am, how as the therapist would you say, oh, can you still step aside? Because you're really like actually you're kind of disagreeing with the client in that moment, right? So it wasn't clear to me how you would tell someone have a self-like part, acting like self, when the client's insisting there is a self present. Like on page 247 is the first time in this chapter that they mention the self-like parts at the, yeah. It's a.
Okay. I have highlighted something from that place towards the bottom. The self-like parts often worry that they will disappear or have no role to play if they make room for the self. We can elicit this concern. What are you afraid would happen if the Meredith, who is not a part, could help out and address it? You won't disappear. You'll just have more choices.
But I feel like the Meredith keeps saying, I am Meredith and I care for everyone. I'm compassionate. I'm looking out, and then what does the therapist do? Keep saying, okay, but still step aside, or
no, well, I mean, it's not exactly like that. I don't, I'm sure.
Yeah,
so,
no, obvious.
Yeah. I'll tell you where I am. Self does not have an agenda, and let me see the book. I'm gonna tell you, there's something from another book club I love. Restoring relationship, transforming fear into love through connection. That's the name of the book. And in that book, it says, okay, ask this question to yourself. Am I able to be with this part of me without needing it to change in any way? Or another similar question is, can I accept this member of my inner family just how it is now without needing it to change in some way? So if it's self, if it has no agenda, it doesn't want you to change, it doesn't want the part to change. And it's not about, oh, step aside, it's not because we are seeking connection with the part. It's not like, oh, just, okay, move to the side, kind of like, it is a very respectful way so we can connect and get to know the part better. It is a very loving way, very caring. Because if we are the part, if we are, if we are one with the part, then how can we validate it? How can we connect with it from a place of self?
Yeah, so the parts that are in the book when they did ask, are you willing to go in that room or things like that, that's more if a part is criticizing or getting in the way of a connection with another part. Is that right? So you would only ask a part, are you happy to, step aside for a moment if you need room clearance to talk to another part. And then,
Yes,
yeah, and then in this case, even if it's like, oh, I am Meredith, I'm compassionate, as long as there is still an agenda, then you still treat it like a part, and then you wait for the,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. If there's an agenda. And when you say to it, go to another room, it's like, yes, you are Meredith. Do you work, how do you work hard? Why? There's an agenda there. So you get to know that. Okay, maybe it's going to be direct access. So normally, if it's a part, it's working hard. Typically, a lot of the burden parts do not enjoy what they're doing. They're trying to change another part, and they're not doing a good job.
I see.
And
I,
like, if you move the side, I will help you, and you won't have to work so hard. So it's a very loving approach. Yeah.
yes, I see. So even the self-like part, what they're saying is the self-like part is acting compassionate, but still trying to change another part through
Yes.
its compassionate way. And that's
Yes.
why it's considered a self-like part.
Yes.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
feels like it has got a responsibility. It's not fully accepting of the part. And Grace has got something to say here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go.
so yeah, when I come into contact with a part that is saying, but it's me, like I am them, so I'll just get curious with that part I was presenting. And if that person can't give me information through insight, like with the 6Fs, so I'll say, so, oh, you are, say, Meredith. How are you showing up? How do you experience yourself in and around her body, right? Like start with the just asking you questions as if it's a part. And then if I kept getting, I don't know what you mean, or if I couldn't get anywhere with it, then I would ask to speak to the part directly. So direct access would be the way to go to get to know this part that thinks that it is self, right? So yeah, that's the direction I would go. Complete.
Yeah. I love that, Grace. Going towards the self-like part with compassion, with curiosity. Curiosity, as you said. Yeah. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. It does.
Okay. I have a lot of questions from this chapter, but there is also a question about racism from the previous chapter. So on page, I need to find it, page 227. And where it says racism, halfway through the page. And I'm going to read the beginning of this paragraph. From the perspective of this book, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and all other rage-fueled, fear-based aggression constitutes the behavior of protectors who guard particularly fragile exiles. Although psychotherapy is not a social justice movement, people do come to therapy for the same reason they seek justice, to heal. So it looks like those extreme protectors, such as our racist parts, they guard particularly fragile exiles. There's something really vulnerable they try to protect. And there's a lot of fear because of those fragile exiles. They have to be really intense and extreme if the racist parts to protect that vulnerability. And what I love also, one is that insight for me, that the racist protectors are extreme because there is extreme pain on the other side within the system. And what I like is, she says here, although psychotherapy is not a social justice movement, however, people go to psychotherapy because they do seek justice for their system, for their suffering. They seek to heal. They're seeking justice for their inner system. And I love that. IFS, looking at IFS as an approach for justice. So I guess I only wanted to share what I really liked. I'm not entirely sure I have a question around that. Does anyone else resonate with this? You can give a nod or not. See IFS as a justice approach.
Hi, this is Sarah. Can I
Yes,
add a contribution to that?
yes, go for it.
Maybe this seems really simplistic, but what if the justice being served in contexts and systems which are hard to change and even with a racist person who doesn't think they need to change, what if one of the main things about IFS is simply listening to the part and really entering in and trying to hear what it has to say? There's a lady who does IFS stuff. She did like a meditation based on something that Richard Schwartz had done. And basically the whole aspect of it is just saying, I see you, I'm glad that you're here. And it's like really acknowledging the part and really listening to it. And then it goes on to say in this meditation about that perhaps the part can relax and just unwind a bit. If not, it just needs to be listened to some more. And just, I don't know, a lot of problems and issues in life even cannot be solved in my understanding. But to have somebody fully enter in, maybe that's where the healing happens.
Yes, I love that. Yes. You know what they call in IFS a U-turn.
What was that again?
A U-turn. So you go inside and notice what's happening, letting that maybe racist part tell its story.
A U-tag?
You turn inside. U-turn.
You take a U-turn. Oh, I see. Right. Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. It's like a play on the concept of U-turn.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because as you say, going inside and also, to expand that a little bit is looking at the system, because you don't only have a racist part, there will be other parts there. The racist part will protect another part. There is a vignette somewhere where this kid, he's an adult, he's racist. But when he turned inside, he grew up in a household where there was a lot of fear about the foreigners, and there's a lot. Racism didn't just appear out of nowhere. There's a big story, a fear around that. I think he grew up in a poor neighborhood, and it was the other, the foreigners in America, whatever it was, I think. So that's how it developed. Yes. I am complete on this, and I do have something, relevant. It's about page 244. Internal systems seek balance. It was quite incredible to read this. Page 244, I think the entire paragraph around balance is wow. And I'm going to read a little bit of that, or a lot of that. Managers and firefighters are always seeking balance. As with Sir Isaac Newton's famous third law of motion, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Inhibition and disinhibition are a package deal. I'll skip a little bit and go to the examples. We see it when publicly puritanical, self-denying individuals engage in some secret disinhibition, such as celibate Catholic priests molesting and raping children, leading evangelicals engage in extramarital heterosexual activity, or have alternate homosexual lives. Anti-abortion politicians pressure their lovers to have abortions. Outspokenly submissive women pursue power by disparaging the idea of powerful women, and so on. So I'll skip a bit and move on to another example. Clients who engage in compulsive practices ranging from mild to criminal with substances, food, gambling, pornography, sex, and so on are manifesting a similar brand of this culture-wide struggle to achieve balance and manage vulnerability. We are them, they are us. So what stood out for me is inhibition and disinhibition are a package deal. If you have one extreme, you will have the other. And often, or more likely, as it says here actually, in the same system. You know, anti-abortion politicians so strongly campaign for that, and yet they get their girlfriends to have abortions. Wow. One part wants that, and another part balances that extreme view. And how it feels a little bit like, if we don't understand IFS, it feels like, what's going on? Is this person crazy? But when you understand IFS, you realize that one part wants that and another part wants something different. But is it, according to this book, it's for the sake of balance, because parts seek balance. And also with the substances. So you have the substances, the addictions, but okay, the stronger addictions, and then on the other side you have the vulnerability. So there's always a balance within our system somewhere, and trying to understand that, it's quite amazing to see, if you have a part, what is the other side, the other part that is balancing things out. Does it make sense, guys? Does that ring through to you at all? Yes, Han?
Is it the idea that if it's a part that's actually kind of acting in a not helpful way, because that means it's been radicalized and more extreme, it only has to do that in response? Whereas if something is more moderate inherently, like if you have a part that's, you know, well functioning already, like it's, let's say someone you know, exercises the right amount. They like it, they never over-exercise, they enjoy it, it's healthy. So then there's no problem to be solved in that case. And then that part might be almost imbalanced, might have balance inherently in the part. And I'm wondering if it's only the parts that become imbalanced that will have the counterpart that it's reacting to, because otherwise there's no need to be so extreme.
Yes, I think yes, the parts are the burden parts, not the, because we are all born in this world with parts, and ideally all our parts are, you know, healthy. They are not burdened. But when we have the limiting beliefs, the distorted beliefs, the trauma, then they become burdened, and then we have something else to try to balance that. So if it's healthy, you don't need anything to balance. You already, you know, it's a balanced system. So IFS is trying to bring to parts that kind of inner harmony through the healing, through the connecting and validating and self-love. So yeah, that's my understanding. And this brings me to another point, and what you just said about, you know, what about when somebody has got healthy behaviors and healthy parts? And I do have a big question around that in this chapter. This is, I've not seen that anywhere else in IFS. This is the first time I'm seeing this. And it's the positive reinforcement. If any, you know, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time, yeah? If there's anything around this balance, but, you know, I'm okay to also move on to the positive reinforcement, page 257. So
Before we switch to page 257, about the balance idea, managers and firefighters are always seeking balance. And then he talks about the struggle and the polarity between being inhibited and being disinhibited. And so to me, it's like this is talking about on page 244, always seeking balance. Then if you start to become more, if self with a capital S starts to become more available, and you start to become more self-led, and you start to understand your managers, protectors, and your exiles and so on, and firefighters, then it's going to be a totally different dynamic than these extremes that are talked about here, about the puritanical self-denying individuals engaging in something that's totally the opposite of what they're espousing, and all that stuff, priests molesting children, evangelicals and extramarital heterosexual and all that. So to me, that's talking about the internal systems are going to find a totally different type of balance if you become more self-led and start to understand your parts and your protectors and your exiles and stuff, is what I would think that might be talking about, because there can be a unhealthy balance, and then there can be the balance that's more integrated into a healthy personality that's healed from some past trauma, and unhealthy maladaptive ways of adapting to the world that's reactions to your inner shame and your disowning of certain parts of yourself, that then you act out in the world and do the total opposite of what you're espousing to be, like the stuff we see in the news sometimes about some evangelical leader that's total hypocrite and stuff like that, you know. That's how I interpret that page for right now.
Mark, yes, and she starts, you know, there are two places where she mentions that. I want to emphasize what you said about the role of the self. And in page 239, and in the summary, page 242. So the they talk about the same thing. Unblending is the whole ball game. Wow. Wow. Yeah, page 242 in the summary, tips on unblending. Unblending is the whole ball game. Pay attention to unblending above all. Once parts unblend, the client's self can take over, and the therapist can be an auxiliary helper, there to assist if a part blends and the client's self isn't available. Accordingly, your main job, the therapist's main job, is to invite protective parts to unblend. A therapist, I'm not entirely, actually, it is the client's, I would say maybe the client. Accordingly, it is for the client, to help the client, to invite protective parts to unblend. And then listen, honor, validate, serve by addressing their fears, and coax them into giving it a try. Giving it a try to unblend. So,
And then on the
yeah.
top of the next page, 243, I just realized the internal system seek balance on 244. The whole title of that section says tips on unblending challenges. So when she talks about the internal system seeking balance, that's like that's an unblending challenge, I think, is that's one of the unblending challenges that she lists a whole bunch of and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, under a democracy, yeah, as well. So is it therapy is a democracy? That's what it says, page 243. So Grace, yeah.
Yeah, so a great way to unblend polarized parts is with externalization, right? Either writing the both parts on a piece of paper, or writing one part with the left hand and one part with the right hand, or actually role playing, where two other people can play those polarized parts. And so once you externalize, the unblending is more accessible. And then once self energy is present and unblending has happened, then you can target which part is loudest, right? So go to one polarized part and get to know its fears and how it's trying to help and when it started doing its job. And then also then turning to the other opposite part, and getting to know that one. And this is all right with self energy present when the unblending is happening. And then the beauty is, if this could happen in real time with warring countries, have them come to the table to see each other's points of view, to understand what they're trying to do, who they're trying to protect. And most of the time they're trying to protect the same exile, or their motives for their actions are to protect the same one underneath. So, yes, there's polarizations, but with IFS, the way to get to the balance, the true balance of harmony, is to hear both parts, hear both parties, right, from self energy, and then get to know their fears. And then asking the parts if they understood the other one, right? Like, see if they were aware of what this other part's motives were. And yeah, it's a really powerful experiential exercise that you could do with role playing, but it also could be done with externalization of the parts in different ways. So yeah, complete.
So to continue from what you were saying, Grace, externalization, that is the key to unblending. And I'm interested in this from the dissociative parts perspective. Page 248, again, in the same chapter. This chapter is so rich. Talking about dissociative parts, in the first paragraph, halfway. Dissociative parts require special patience. That's the title. And then halfway, clients describe dissociative parts as, for example, clouds, fog, mental blankness, swirling colors, a blanket over the head and body, and so on. That is, they tend to show up looking like what they do rather than being personified. Bear in mind that the part may be a pre-verbal infant or a barely verbal toddler who will be challenging to befriend because its mentality most resembles a feral kitten. Now, wow! So for dissociations, the dissociative parts tend to show up as their roles, what they do. Maybe fog, cloud, or whatever else. So now, and they're not personified. And I really think, I'm not entirely, maybe I'm not entirely sure how you see it, but I think the more I understand parts, when we externalize them and see them as persons, it's easier for us to relate with that. And even here she says, okay, even though they appear as their roles, not, what the age they are, not personified, there is actually, if you dig deep, you may find that barely verbal toddler or pre-verbal infant. So I wonder, what do you think about, say, dissociative parts, being curious and saying, with maybe your clients or yourself, how would that expression of dissociation look like if it was a person? What age would it be? Would you like push that way or not? Would you just be happy with, oh, this is just a cloud or whatever else? This is just a fog or mental blankness or swirling colors, blanket.
So okay, so I don't know about externalizing a dissociative part. I wasn't referring to that. I also feel like that comment that I made about externalization with polarized parts is just a tool or technique that helps when there's a lot of conflict between parts and when parts don't even know the other part, right? Like they don't even know the other part exists. And so going back to the dissociative part, there are lots of parts. And even like I'm actually working with one myself right now in my own work. And it comes to me as a cloud, like a cloud bubble. And it's foggy. And so it's right on target what it's saying. And getting to know it has not been an externalization for me. It's really just focusing on that as a target part. And then, it's not talking to me. It is pre-verbal. It is exactly what she's describing here is how I'm experiencing this part. And it shows me things more than it doesn't talk to me. And it's also interesting that it might also be part of a legacy burden and or even it could be even a guide, right? Like, so we don't know. Like I'm still exploring what this dissociative part is in my system. But as far as I think your question was, do you treat it like it's a part and ask it how old it is, right? Or when did it first get?
How would you look like if you were a person?
Yeah, I wouldn't go with that inquiry because I wouldn't ask that specific question, like, because it's leading. Like I would be just, open and curious and say, how, can you show me anything? Like, I don't know. I guess for me, this dissociative part that I'm getting to know much more, would not like that question about how would you show up if you were a person and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that makes no sense to me. Like that's like a question for a very young pre-verbal part that doesn't understand the inquiry. And so I don't know, that's what my first thing that's coming up for me is that it'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean?
Maybe my question wasn't really the best, And I still think I have seen it, asking a hypothetical question, in a more gentle way. And I'm not talking about this because it just in this chapter we're talking today, it talks about, personifying a dissociative part. And they normally come up as their roles, not as a person. Okay. So I'm interested in, what about if parts just show up as an emotion or something like that? Would you?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that not all parts are persons, that some parts are guides and some parts are energy. So to direct them to come up as an age or a job is not always how a part has developed, right? Like it
Yes.
can come from, so in my case, this part that is dissociative, I see that it developed when it's at a certain time, right? That it's protecting a young one at a certain age, but in itself, it's not an age or a person. It's an energy. It's just, that's how it is in my system. So I don't know
Yes.
if that makes
Yes.
sense.
That makes sense. Wow, in this chapter it also talks about guides and something else. Can't remember. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm gonna have to find it. But yeah, it talks about, so it makes sense what you're saying. Not everything, is a part, like a personified part. It might not be. It might be an energy. It might be a legacy burden. It might be a guide. So yes.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing, Grace. Thank you so much. There is a book called Feeding Your Demons, Ancient Wisdom for Resolving Inner Conflict by Ch13 and she calls parts demons. And it is quite interesting that, she kind of encourages that part to become personified. So I'm still like, I get it that we have to exercise caution, and I'm still curious because, in my system, and I'm not sitting with clients, when they personify parts, it's so much easier. Our job becomes like so easy. When it's like, oh, I can see the baby, I can see that little ghost, I can see that and this. It's wow, it's fast. They can do much better work, more efficient, faster when they externalize in this way. But when it's just an energy or just a feeling, wow, it takes longer.
Yeah, it could be just an image, right? Like I said, it's a cloud bubble. It could be a wall.
Yeah.
It could be an invisible barrier. Like a part is not always, it's how do you experience this? The question, how do you experience this in and around your body? It's not always going to be, just, I don't know if that makes sense. Like if you've come across like walls or like
Yes, I have.
a cave even, right? Like there's so many things that are not human that parts show
yes,
up
I
as.
have, and I've had clients with that. So yeah, interesting, very interesting. And
Oh, I just quickly was gonna say that, like, for me, I can personify objects very easily. Like for a wall, I can imagine the wall is like, it doesn't necessarily have an age, but it can have a personification, like it has a intent, I guess. And maybe that's what it means to personify, to actually attribute a sense of a intent and that type of characterization. It's not like it has to be fully. So then I wonder, even for things like fogs and walls, like you can imagine a cloudy mist that's like coming into a scene. That mist can have an intent or a personification to it.
yes,
So
I can, and some people might not. So we have to be gentle to respect
Yes.
their system. So for me, like, you know, when you said like a mist or whatever, I can think of Zeus doing that. And
Yeah.
you know, I have a wall, and I thought, what about, you know, what about if is that cannot turn that into a person? And I'm like, yeah, I know how it looks like. There's a person pushing a wall, you know, kind of building the wall. You know, I can see a person behind that wall that supports that wall. So now I have the object and a person. So my system is quite open to that. Yeah, Grace?
Yes, so really, it's up to the part to say what it is. And so if there's a part that wants to make sense of it or figure it out or label it or make it into something else, that's just another part. That's not self-energy.
Okay. It can get tricky. So figuring out part is coming up and supporting and helping and becoming creative with, you know, how to express parts.
Yeah, if we trust that the part has space and self-energy is present, it doesn't have to do any of that. The part will open up and reveal itself.
The title of
Ready.
this page 248 is dissociative parts require special patience. And like for personification, like I've had people that have shamed me in my life. I've had people that were critics, like my inner critic is, and my inner shaming. And because of my inner shaming and vulnerability there, I sometimes take something somebody says that's wasn't even meant to be critical or shaming as shaming. I look out in the world and I see these incredibly ambitious people that, you know, are billionaires, and that they're going to give millions of dollars to a politician so they can have a lower tax rate when they have more money than they could ever possibly spend in their entire lifetime. And so it's easy to personify certain things. And so I can recognize I have this inner critic. I have this ambition part inside me that wants to become famous so that I'll be important, as opposed to not being important, and I'll get attention that I want since child. So all those things, yeah, like are easy to personify. And what she's talking about here is showing up looking like what they do. If I'm just totally dissociative, it could be like that blanket idea, or that the fog and the clouds that obscure the sun or something. That's what they do. And we can say, you can personify that if you want to, like you can imagine the wall having a personality or whatever, but there's definitely a good distinction here. And a dissociative part, like with the inner critic, I can go, oh yeah, because of society and the way I was raised and maybe my parents, I can understand this inner critic that's always feeling inferior and ashamed and not worthy from the standpoint of society and other persons. But if you were really traumatized, like dissociation being a defining feature of the aftermath of something that happened to you, especially at a real young age, or even a natural disaster, or some horrible thing that happened to you in war, that's a totally different thing. There's just this dissociation from all your feelings. That's a protector, but that's not like a personifiable thing. That's what she's getting at here, I think. And then I just love the last sentence at the bottom of page 248. Every sensation, feeling, thought, or behavior, and I guess we can say dissociation is a feeling or sensation or behavior or whatever too. But every one of those is either you or your client, and either you or your client is a player. And then I love this sentence phrase so much. And every interaction can be a wrecking ball or a building block. wrecking ball or building block. So,
Yes.
and that's we're in therapy, so we can turn things that have been wrecking balls in our lives into building blocks. Okay.
Yes, it's interesting. Yeah.
And becomes self-led with something that happened to us. And so, yeah, but yeah, and the requiring special patience, yeah, there's no simple answer like, oh, don't ask this leading question because maybe it's a dissociative. But I think as a therapist, you would recognize, oh, this looks like it might be. That's why she wrote this book too. This looks like it might, oh, when you're talking about this fog, it's all a fog or a blur, or you're imagining some blanket, then you know, you would adjust to that. But yeah.
Well,
Anyway, I don't know.
for me, it's like with the leading questions, we have to be a little careful with myself personally, but I would be happy with leading questions as long as you know, we respect the client system. If the client doesn't want to go with my leading question, then that's fine. We respect that. So, you know, I had a client with an addiction, and I'm like, oh, that feels like this metaphor. Okay, I made up my own metaphor. Is that how it is for your system? The client says, no, it's not at all. I have a different metaphor for you. This looks like, he said, okay, I'll tell you the metaphor. A football player, American football player, taking the ball and not, you know, going to score. It was like an addiction, going to score, didn't care. I want my addiction, I want my fix. Boom, I'm a football player. That's it. Not my, you know, he said to me, not you, not your metaphor, my metaphor. It is a football player. And I'm like, wow, brilliant. Let's go for, you know, wow, you've done a brilliant job. Let's go with that. Is that okay for your system for us to see that addiction as a football player, American football player? It's like, yeah, that's it. And we had an entire session with that football player who revealed so much about the system. So it was exciting for me, you know, to see that evolve, and it felt respected to the customer, you know, respecting their system. And so I'm okay to lead, but, you know, see if the client say, I don't know how to call it, take the, you know, take the bait kind of thing. If it doesn't fit, we'll move on to something else. But I guess, you know, yeah, sorry.
The top of page 242 of the textbook, I took some notes this morning, and the top of page 242 is the first, it's the section age matters, comma, in some. And then halfway through that paragraph, it talks about when you talk with protectors about quitting their jobs and doing something different, try using open-ended language. So I wrote down O-E-L so I can memorize that, the open-ended language. That's an acronym, a 3-letter acronym for open-ended. And then there was 4 different whats. What might interest you now? What's next for you? What are you drawn to, or what calls to you? And so this was in the age matters section, but I think that applies to what we're talking about here, using open-ended language. So don't suggest, oh, this metaphor is going to apply here, but you can use open-ended language to and stuff. So I think that's just,
you know, so Mark, I think yes, and a little bit for me personally, you know, whether I'm wrong or right, I don't know, but personally, you know, I have, you know, big sorts talk about hypothetical questions. What would it be like if you didn't have that and you had this? You know, what about if you didn't have the addiction and you, what would you be doing instead? So we try to move our clients into a different space of healing. And see whether that's, you know, if the client's not ready, it's not ready. But
yeah, that's open-ended. That's open-ended to suggest something and see if they respond to it, or no, it's not that. So yeah, I totally agree. I wasn't saying that what you're saying is not open-ended at all. Yeah, yeah.
If it comes from like, even I would go as far as saying, okay, I see, you know, I wonder, I'm curious, how would that look like a person? Like, you know, maybe whatever, this part, would there be a shape around that? You know, and I see that the personification of a part, for example, I see that maybe like the playfulness of the self, not so much as, you know, it could potentially be a figuring out part, a protector, or it could be a playfulness. Playfulness is self, and self can bring that playfulness, that creativity to parts when there's that connection. You know, what about let's have fun here, let's personify. Are you up for it? If you're not, you're not. Oh wow, this is, it's a lot to think about, though. It is, and it requires a lot of self-energy from client, from mainly from therapists when they support the client. And I have another question. If we are complete with this, I'll give it a few seconds, because this is quite, this shocked me, this. Are we okay to move on? Yeah. And it's page 257. And the piece I would like us to discuss is positive reinforcement is more effective than punishment. This, wow, I've never read anything like this in IFS literature, I think. So I'm going to start halfway. And she says, Karen Pryor, 2006, called positive reinforcement the good fairy of behaviorism. Internal critics use the bad fairy, punishment. In return, they get rebellion. Okay. Because they're tired and unhappy with this outcome, they really want social inclusion, safety, security, and happiness. They benefit from understanding how they can really be helpful. Although we cannot control each other, we can and do routinely influence each other. We influence each other. We routinely influence each other. So the good fairy of positive reinforcement, ignoring behaviors we wish to minimize while paying attention to behaviors we aim to maximize, takes discipline and the willingness to try something new. But it is the most effective way of exerting influence. So the way I'm understanding this, in our system, we may have the critic, which is like, you know, the bad fairy, but we may have other parts. They want us to be healthy, go and exercise, do healthy things. And that's the good fairy of positive reinforcement. Or, you know, the positive reinforcement, it could be like, you know, a part that wants to motivate us. And she says what about if we ignore behaviors we wish to minimize, like not exercising, while paying attention to behaviors we aim to maximize, like, you know, trying to get motivated, finding reasons to exercise. And that takes discipline and willingness to try something new. But it is the most effective way of exerting influence. To me, this sounds like coaching, like life coaching or something like that. Like, it sounds like coaching rather than IFS therapy. It feels like a resource, trying to build that positive reinforcement trying to invite that good fairy of positive reinforcement into our system, to focus on that, not paying attention to the critic, paying attention to the positive reinforcement, to the good fairy, not to the bad fairy. This is so different because she doesn't talk about healing trauma. Of course, you know, it's about healing exiles and connecting with them. And also, she talks about focusing, you know, building up those good fairies. Yeah, Anne?
That is connected to the question I had, which is on the habits. Because again, habits often are more related to the coaching realm. I don't think habits always have a traumatic root. You know, sometimes we just get into a local pleasure loop that's, you know, more immediately gratifying than something that's long-term good for us, and we can just develop a habit we want to change. And yeah, I was curious, like, what you said helped me give more context to IFS regarding habits, because I felt like that was quite short when she talked about habits. She just said, oh, be surprised, habits will just finish when you do IFS. I was just wanting some more understanding, but I guess what you said helped me realize that I guess for habits, even when they're not maybe big exiles involved in the habit, there are different parts involved in a habit, you know, the one that wants to change, the one that wants to stay. And then maybe what you're saying is that by taking this compassionate route toward the one, towards hearing what everyone wants, and then also encouraging the one that can have the resourcefulness to make the change, because it's always effortful to undo a habit, right? It's there's a reason there's a habit, because it's hard to change. And by being encouraging toward the parts, then they'll feel more willing to change than if they're being punished, I guess. I'm wondering, maybe that's.
So, you know, I have actually something that, so about habits, it's on page 249, habits. I highlighted quite a few things about habits. And the way I think she talks about habits is, you know, there's a motivation, and there's a reason why you have a bad habit. And, you know, the way I understand it, it is likely that there's a trauma if there's a bad habit and you can't let go. There's some kind of fear. But yes, I'm not sure. Are there any habits, you know, do you always have to do trauma work if with bad habits? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's a really good point. And but I guess alongside trauma work, actually, yeah, I think I misspoke what I said originally, but I do think maybe sometimes there's no trauma, but even assuming if there was always trauma, I think alongside trauma work, there's still effort. You know, like cigarettes, you might take up because you have stress and you have some trauma, but then you do get physically addicted. You do get addicted to the feeling of it, and your body's physical internal response is craving it. You know, it just because all of a sudden you feel better emotionally, it'll make it easier to change, I think. But I think there's just kind of more mechanical things that take effort to rewire as well, you know, for a habit.
Yes. Wow. Mark, you put in the book by, you know, Karen Pryor. Yes, and I agree on. And, you know, I am curious now in this book, Karen Pryor's book, Don't Shoot the Dog, The Art of Teaching and Training. So she, Martha Sweezy mentions her name, so mentions Karen Pryor. So I am really interested. So Marlene, what would you like to say?
I was noticing that the inner critic is a shaming critic. It's not a positive reinforcement. And so it leads to vengeful rebellion, it says in here. And that resonates with me because the inner critic is trying to change a behavior, but it's doing it through coercion, domination, and it just gets rebellion. And this is again the lack of balance that reminds me of the example of the religious hypocrisy. If the pendulum swings too far in one direction, then there's this compensation to balance it out, but it goes in too much of an extreme direction. And so I'm wondering how the part that's the inner critic could become more positively reinforcing rather than honing in on the behavior that it wants to change. So I'm done. That's just my comment.
I have something to share with you guys, how I positively reinforce, because trying to do trauma work it requires a lot of hard work. And I have a critic, of course. And how do I do my good fairy work? I'm going to show you something. It came through my IFS journaling, my solution. And here is my magic jar. Okay, here's my magic jar. So every day I want to do 3 things, like 3 habits. And I tend to forget. So I normally write them on a little post-it and put it on my computer. They do fly away. So what I've done is I have a jar. I put a date, 3 things I want to achieve in a day, with a little, whatever it's called, sticky thing here. And every day I'll pop it into the jar. I can reflect and review at the end of the day. And then every day I start with a new jar, my positive reinforcement jar, without any trauma work. But it has come out from IFS journaling. I did a lot of journaling with my parts and see what they needed. Reinforcing my habits. And thank you for the heart. And Nancy.
I really love that, Vana, and it made me think that maybe they don't talk about it in IFS as much because of the focus on trauma, but there's so much work just towards listening to what would bring us joy and what would motivate us and what the parts would, feel more supported with. Like, of course, that is part of IFS, but just to also really even emphasize the positive aspect of what they need more and bringing imagination to that. So yeah, I loved your jar. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to have my desired habits right there in front of my face, kind of thing, next to my screen, so I don't forget them. They're important to me. My healthy habits.
They're great.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to mention. It's a small thing, but I love it. About the agency of parts. Page 258. I'm not entirely sure where it is. I'm going to try and find it. Let's see. No. Okay, 257, I think it talks about the agency. 257, the first paragraph towards the end. It says, third, win cooperation from the protectors by using language that highlights the target part's agency. Rather than saying she's blended with the exile, try saying the exile is blended with her. And rather than asking the client to unblend that part, say, ask that part to unblend. Wow, it's amazing, isn't it? It's like, wow, does it make sense, guys, what she says here? Ask the part to unblend. Ask the part, are you willing? Give the agency to the part. Are you willing to give me some space to soften back? Is that okay with you? Rather than, I will unblend you. It's so different. I'm going to be there for you, but it's up to you to unblend. So I just want to share how much I appreciated what she said there about the agency of parts. We respect them as if they are, people within us. We don't make decisions on their behalf. Yes, Anne?
I had a question about the paragraph right under what you read. So it's page 257, and it's saying the U-turn will take you to important, sometimes unexpected places. And it says, if a client describes being shamed, ask this question. When someone treats you badly, how do you treat yourself? If we help the injured part first, then protectors calm down. If the client's self doesn't intervene quickly, however, protectors will launch into a variety of strategies, possibly including trying to understand the shamer's motives, justifying the shamer's behavior, criticizing the exile, or getting angry and plotting revenge. While engaging in these kinds of strenuous, contradictory actions, the client abandons this exile once again. So my question is, if the client's self doesn't intervene quickly, so then is there something that the therapist should do to try to ensure that the client's self does intervene quickly enough? Or I guess this is a question from maybe several sessions ago about being overwhelmed by the exile. This is what she's hinting at, right? That the exile will overwhelm. And we had a discussion about how often that ever actually happens. But once that happens, I forget what we had discussed back then. Yeah.
It looks like if you don't intervene, other protectors will get triggered. And it's going to be like, you will feel like a little bit like crazy in our system. So when somebody treats you badly, so there's going to be a part that may get angry. Then there's so many, a variety of strategies. Another part that says, oh, the shamer is right, justifying the shamer. Another part that says, criticizes, oh, you're stupid, you shouldn't be feeling like that. Criticizing the exile. And another one plotting a revenge. So, a part saying, oh, yeah, the shamer is right. Oh, no, the shamer, we need to take a revenge on the shamer. Well, that feels like it's chaos in the system. So ideally, if we can find self and extend that self energy to the part, if we can do that U-turn, look inside, that would be perfect. But yeah, Mark?
Yeah, the U-turn, like if someone treats you badly, then you've got all these protectors that might be like getting very angry, becoming very defensive, trying to, why did you say that? Trying to understand the shamer's motives, maybe just saying, oh yeah, I guess I should be ashamed, trying to justify the shamer's behavior. Criticizing yourself, whatever's exiled that you do are vulnerable and feel shame about. plot revenge. God, I'm gonna get this person or whatever, this situation. And so to me, what that is saying is, what's the injured part? That's the exile. And all of these things are just taking you away from trying to help the injured part, the exile, and being concerned about how do I feel about this? And it says, when engaging in these kinds of strenuous contradictory actions, that relates to habit that we were discussing earlier, because they're built into your habitual response to this vulnerable exile inside. The client has abandoned the exile once again. It's much more productive, I think, is what she's saying, about doing this type of U-turn and not, okay, I'm going to get you, I'm going to be angry about this, or yeah, I should be ashamed, I'm just no good. All those things. It's like, how does that exile feel? And I don't think this has got, this is something that's not like, your therapist is not going to be there. I guess this is when a client describes being shamed. It's not like you're with them in the world when somebody says, like for racism, if somebody says a racist epithet towards you and you're just walking down the street, then, your therapist is likely not going to be with you. So this is talking about teaching the client and giving them access to self, so you can flip the switch and intervene quickly and have a totally different response. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then that totally different response would be kind of like, you've got this self with a capital S that can, respond in a totally different way instead of being blended with your habitual protector reaction, which might be, just getting into fisticuffs with the person that you're angry at, or yelling at them and all this stuff and that. So anyway,
Yeah.
just some thoughts about.
I love that, Mark, so much. I love what you just said. Exactly, because you can't have the therapist all the time with you. But when you can go inside, when you do the U-turn, and you're like, okay, how does my system react when someone treats me badly? And you just take a pause and you slow down. That process needs slowing down.
And that, I just realized how I love this, because it says, if a client describes being shamed, I'm the therapist, ask this question. When someone treats you badly, okay, somebody just treated me badly. How do you treat yourself
Yes.
in that situation? So this is kind of like teaching and being curious. Let's find out how you treat yourself. And maybe as we get playful with this and curious about this, give you more insight and
Yes.
realize that I don't have to treat myself that way. There's a way that can free me of feeling totally ashamed and my day is ruined because this person said something or did something or shamed me. My day is ruined. No, you can treat yourself in a different way that's more liberating.
Well, yeah. Well, sort of. Yes, that. So you can treat yourself horribly and say, oh my God, my day is ruined. And then there's another part that says, oh, things can be better. And we kind of validate both and notice the pain behind it, the fear, the hurt exile, the exile that is hurt by the transgression or whatever happened, yeah? And then we have a chance of being with that painful part. Yes.
Yeah.
Respect.
And noticing how you treat yourself. And that's not a bad thing, how you treat yourself. But maybe we're going to discover as therapy goes on that this is something that happened to you when you were 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
And now you're an adult. And so you don't need to be stuck in that protector, but that protector was serving you, and you can not be blended with that protector whenever this situation occurs. But
Yes.
that's not saying that it was a bad thing, but it's not saying that immediately you're going to just be able to do this. It might be months more of therapy before you get the ability to just do that U-turn. So sometimes
Yeah.
you're gonna try to do the U-turn and it's like, my car can't do it. The street's too narrow. And then, months later, it's like, oh, this U-turn is so simple and I can do it faster and more effectively. So patience isn't patience one of the P's?
Yes. it is.
Patience, playfulness, patience. Yeah, patience. Yep.
Persistence.
Persistence. Yeah.
And perspective, because as you said, there are other perspectives. To me, the more I know about IFS, my critics have calmed down a lot. They're not as strong. And I'm okay with kind of like, I feel better with whatever they have to tell me. It's like, yeah, there is more perspective into my system. So even just knowing IFS helps straight away. Yeah. So thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. As we're coming to an end, is anything else to discuss? Or next week is going to be our last chapter, chapter 14. And let me know if there's anything else before we close our recorded session. Chapter 14, what is the title? So yeah, I'm going to read the qualities of the 8 C qualities and the 5 Ps. Compassion, creativity, curiosity, confidence, courage, calm, connectedness, clarity. And the 5 Ps: presence, persistence, perspective, playfulness, patience. Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. And 260.
How Therapy Ends is the title of chapter 14, page 265.
Yeah. So our last chapter next week. All right. Thank you for today. And we will continue with our private discussion.